Hello, and welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. We are very glad to have you here with us today. And just in advance, we apologize if there's been any mix-up with the timing, but as often the case, this anachronistic and archaic practice known as daylight savings time snuck up on us at the last minute. And we are actually beginning, what is it, an hour late or an hour early? I don't even know anymore. All I know is that we set the clocks forward at midnight. So we are at 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, not Eastern Standard Time. So we apologize to anyone who doesn't live in this archaic system of switching the clocks, or if you switch the clock at another time on another date, then perhaps your schedule has been a little bit disturbed because of that. But in any case, if you are here listening to this, then we are happy that you made it. We're glad to have you. And today's talk is going to be in a slightly different format than we normally do, because normally everything is completely improvised. We just speak from our heart, as is our way. But because last week we covered what we called the essential practices or essential spirituality, the real core elements and core practices essential for spiritual development. And we used a framework for that discussion that comes from the Bhagavad Gita. And it is the four types or four aspects of yoga. The yoga of awakening, the four elements related to the yoga of awakening. And just to refresh your memory, we used the following lecture from Glorian on practical spirituality. And under Yoga of Awakening, from the Bhagavad Gita, come these four elements of yoga: Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Raja Yoga. And we should probably make that bigger so you guys can see that better. And these relate to work, service, and sacrifice of the physical body. The path of devotion related to the heart, that's Bhakti Yoga. Jnana Yoga, the path of self-analysis and knowledge and psychology related to intellect. And Raja Yoga, the path of psychic control. And the fourth way related to consciousness. So this was the framework that the Bhagavad Gita provides, and which we used as the framework to discuss the essential practices. But as you may or may not know, we are here to offer another framework. The framework that we refer to as the AUM of Life, the Analogous Ultimate Methodology. And the framework that we are here to offer humanity is in no way, shape, or form contrarian or contradictory to any other framework. What it is, what we hope it is, and what we hope to be able to show you today is that the AUM of Life is a framework that transcends and, in fact, supersedes just this question of the yoga of awakening, just this question of practical spirituality. The AUM of Life transcends and supersedes that. It is, in fact, a more foundational framework. And yet, in that framework, all of the essential practices that we discussed last week, according to the framework provided by the Bhagavad Gita, the Yoga of Awakening, these four elements, all of those essential practices, which can be mapped onto this system, can likewise be mapped onto the AUM of Life, quite systematically, in fact. And what we hope to be able to show you today is how the AUM of Life integrates the essential practices into a framework which, in and of itself, is not specific and not solely concerned with matters of the spirit, with matters of illumination, spirituality, awakening, what have you. And because of that, the AUM of Life as a framework presents humanity with an opportunity to approach a framework from a scientific, philosophical, biological, cosmological, sociological, psychological, even technological perspective. Because the AUM of Life really underlies all phenomena. It is that foundational a structure. It is that foundational a framework. That's why we call it the Analogous Ultimate Methodology. All representations, all expressions of the AUM of Life are analogous to its fundamental core foundational nature. And so that nature must also be at the heart, at the very foundation of the path of awakening. And so while this framework is useful and practical that we get from the Bhagavad Gita, let us be honest with ourselves. It really will only speak to a select niche audience who is already looking for such a framework and is already, shall we say, receptive to ancient texts and ancient mythologies from the East, and perhaps individuals who are already enamored with yoga and perhaps already practicing hatha yoga and so on. You cannot go to a secular scientist, a physicist, a technologist, an atheist, or any number of people from any number of other backgrounds with such a framework as what comes from the Bhagavad Gita and expect wide open arms, open minds, and receptivity. But the AUM of Life, with that framework, we can show how it exists at the heart and at the foundation of all concerns of the human condition, of all areas of study, whether it's biology, chemistry, physics, even technology, biology, etc. And because the AUM of Life expresses itself throughout all aspects of the human condition, we can use the specific expressions, the analogies, the analogous expressions of AUM as a entry point, an entree, a welcoming, familiar landing for individuals from those various specific points of view, perspectives, ways of seeing the world, to enter into and begin to appreciate the AUM of psychology, the AUM of awakening, the AUM of spirituality, the practical spirituality that ultimately we are all looking for, the day-to-day practical elements that we can practice moment to moment in our lives, which will set us on the track of evolution and get us off the downward spiral of devolution. And so today, in order for us to discuss and apply all of the various practices that we discussed last week, those essential practices, in order for us to graft them to this form, this structure that we call the AUM of Life, we are going to go through a hopefully relatively brief summary and expression of just what is the AUM of Life and how does it function and how does it operate. And as we do that, hopefully, we will be able to insert and demonstrate how the various different practices that we've discussed last week, how they apply each step along the way. So that's our overview for our approach to today. So it's going to be a little bit different because we have some prepared slides. But again, hopefully we can move through it quickly. And so without further ado, let's just get into it. All right. So we're going to make this bigger for you all. Now, barring any unforeseen technological dilemmas, hopefully everything should go according to plan. So these slides that we're showing you today are actually taken from an aspect of the Attlas project. And the Attlas project is our life's work. And what we're showing you today, which is AUM, the individual seeking analogous ultimate methodology, is an essential aspect of our life's work. That's what Attlas information is all about. And we may as well, give full disclosure, because we have mentioned how 2023 is going to be a pivotal year, and we're turning 50 this year. We'll be turning 50 in June. Attlas information was called Attlas information not by accident. And really, these live streams have been as much for our benefit as they have been for yours, because we are also learning. And hopefully, as we go through today's presentation, you will see how that is so, and how that is the AUM of Life. It's the only way one can learn. No one can prepare to do what they came here to do without actually doing it in some form. And so we are at that precipice, at that cusp, at that turning point where preparation must give way to action and actual realization of all of our efforts to prepare. And so that means the Attlas project is going to be taking on a more, I don't want to say a more final form, but a sharper, more precise, more focused, and indeed more prominent, prevalent space in our life. And that will likely include some of the information that you're going to be seeing today, understanding that what we're showing you today is only one aspect of the Attlas project, and that will become apparent by the end of today as well. All right, then, without further ado, let's see if we can get this out. So this is an enso, or a circular form. This comes from Japanese calligraphy and Buddhism and Zen Buddhism. This is a brush stroke, calligraphy brush stroke. It's that circular form. And it relates to Bushido, or the way of the warrior. And the relationship between these two forms, this circular form, this open-ended or circular or spiral form, can be encompassed as Bushido, as life in every breath. And we were introduced to all of this when we lived in Japan. And the act of calligraphy in Japan is really a meditation. The just as it is, or it was, in medieval Europe for the monks who were copying the Bible by hand and creating illuminated texts. And just as calligraphy is to Islam, which renounces any idolatry or imagery of their prophet or of the gods. So they rely on the illumination of the text through beautiful calligraphy and illumination of the words. So this is a tradition which goes back thousands of years and crosses all sorts of cultures. There is something about the illumination, the expression of the word and how it's all connected, and that it's a meditation. But these forms, these flowing forms, well, in Zen Buddhism and Bushido, it comes down to this single circular form, this enso. And that in many ways is kind of a traditional esoteric background for where we are going today. And we are going to be discussing what, it's not just AUM, we call it ISAUM, individuals seeking analogous ultimate methodology. And because of the perspective that we are approaching this from, we can leap right into the aspects of awakening and spirituality or psychology. And we all know, and even in secular psychology, the practice of mindfulness, what we sometimes call self-observation, or and self-remembering. You will remember those from last week if you tuned in last week. One of the essential practices on the path is mindfulness. Well, that's the very beginning of the Analogous Ultimate Methodology. Self-observation, mindfulness, awareness. That's where we begin. And what we are aware of ourselves and the elements within ourselves which we need to be aware of, our egos, fear, lust, greed, pride, gluttony, laziness, shame, all these so-called traumas from our youth, etc. These need to be diagnosed. So the second step is diagnosis, but diagnosed not with intellect, but diagnosed with the same tool, the same faculty that we used in mindfulness, which is pure consciousness, free consciousness, pure observation, objectivity, objective analysis. The intellect, the ego mind, is subjective, it's mechanical, it is an inferior faculty. So from mindfulness, we move to diagnosis. And from there, related to diagnosis is analysis, because diagnosis is first recognizing what it is that we are looking at. And then we can move to analysis, which is, okay, what is its nature? How does it work? And specifically in relation to egos, how does it cause us and others suffering? From there, our conscious analysis in meditation leads to what the Buddhists sometimes refer to as a flash of lightning in the dark of night, samadhi, an ecstasy, or simply put, a comprehension, that eureka moment that you sometimes read about when you read about the Greeks and Greek philosophy and the Greek philosophers who would jump up and start running through the streets of Athens yelling, "Eureka, Eureka," because they had achieved some incredible comprehension about the nature of reality. And that comes in a flash. And that we receive that through consciousness, through free consciousness, that spark, that flash of lightning in the dark of night. That synthesis, synthesizing the answer, the truth, then leads to catharsis. Because once we have learned our lesson, we've learned our lesson about how our egos cause suffering for us and others, we can be, that ego is no longer has a purpose in our life. We created that ego in the past or in a past life due to our defects and vices, our errors, our mistakes. We caused suffering for others, and we synthesized an ego. That ego is a manifestation of our karma. And so by synthesizing a comprehension of that ego now, we have learned our lesson. We have extracted from living with that ego the knowledge, the self-evident experiential knowledge, that which we seek. We've extracted that, and so now that ego no longer serves a purpose. It can be discarded. Now, we are not the one to do the discarding. We're just a mere mortal vessel and a personality. But our Divine Mother can take care of the janitorial efforts, and as a result, we can achieve liberation from that ego, from that particular cause of suffering. And specifically, when we talk of liberation, we are liberating a little bit of consciousness, which was bottled up inside of that ego. A little bit of ourselves, the faculty that we need to know ourselves, to know our true selves, to know our being, is consciousness. But we don't have access to the consciousness that's bottled up inside of our egos, because the consciousness inside of those egos is subjective. It's subjected to those egos. But if we can comprehend those egos, and our Divine Mother can discard those egos, turn them to dust in her divine fire, then the consciousness inside is liberated. And that liberated consciousness now adds to our pool of free consciousness to do what? To go around the circle, to go around again. We now have more consciousness with which to be mindful. We can expand our awareness and deepen our connection to ourself. Whoops. Jumping ahead here. Okay. And all of this is a process of self-evident experiential knowledge. None of what you see here is a function of intellectualizing or belief. This is all practical, experiential, conscious action. But as you can see, it's a cycle. As we go around and around. And as we will see, it's a curve of a very specific nature. By the way, to our comment on mindfulness and the nature of mindfulness and self-observation, and how it is the beginning of the entire process, Julie Godfrey said 100%. And thank you for that early comment, because here is the link. If anybody wants to jump on, ask a question or participate in some way, there's the link to come and be a part of the live stream. Understanding that the first part of today is going to be this PowerPoint presentation, but nonetheless, you are more than welcome to come and participate. You are always, everyone is welcome. You can ask questions, interrupt me. It's not a problem. All right. So that then is individuals seeking the analogous ultimate methodology. And that's all well and good. And, we can get to some of the more specifics of how all those other essential practices map onto this. We have a slide that's dedicated to that later on. But this really isn't the problem, is it? All of us who are here know that one of the essential aspects of the framework of spiritual development is sacrifice for others, and service and sacrifice for others. And all of us, to one degree or another, feel a very deep compassion for this humanity, for this planet, and for all the suffering in the world. And remember that everything has its antithesis in manifest reality, right? The Tao, the yin and the yang. This is all well and good, what you see before you, but it's not the whole picture. It's not the complete picture. This represents the upward spiral of expansion and synthesis, the upward spiral of evolution to being, the expansion of consciousness, and the synthesis of self-evident experiential knowledge, and the synthesis of being, to be or not to be. Remember, that is the question. But if there's an upward spiral of evolution, there must also be its antithesis. If we have something called individuals seeking the analogous ultimate methodology, then we also have, and unfortunately it's the vast majority of people on this planet, eyes suffering the analogous ultimate methodology. Through unawareness, through temptation, identification, indulgence, hypnosis, and ignorance. The unawareness of themselves, right? The zombie apocalypse, people sleepwalking through life, unaware that they're being manipulated by their own desires, their own egos, fear, lust, greed, pride, gluttony, laziness, etc. And then presented with temptations, they identify with the temptation and they cannot detach themselves from the desire. And so they indulge themselves. And the more they indulge those egos that are presenting the temptations, the more they identify and indulge in those egos, the more those egos bottle up their consciousness and steal their vital energy. They become weak and they become hypnotized. And hypnosis leads to ignorance. And ignorance, well, how can someone practice mindfulness if they're ignorant? Ignorance leads to just more unawareness. It's the reverse of individuals seeking the ultimate methodology. We have egos, the psychological sufferings causes. An explosion of ego leads to an implosion of life and a devolution to not being. So the analogous ultimate methodology is how all phenomena come into being and come out of being. In other words, evolution and devolution. It is the same process. It is the same circular spiral process. Expansion and synthesis, or explosion and implosion. And this is, I mean, all you have to do is look around the world. And between the two options, you know that this one, the one here in red, this is what dominates. This is what dominates the psychology of this humanity. Julie wishes to add here, using mindfulness led me to find this page today. It's always fascinating, but never surprising. But to others, but to others, it appears that you are trying to make it all fit to my opinion. But it is the flash that leads me, and it is a blessing and quite an emotional experience. Musical terms and functions this week have been really brought to the surface. Thank you so much for sharing. It is being aware of how I got here that does bring comfort, but also purpose, but also a backlash from, she might be typing some more there. If you always follow your intuition, it'll always lead you in the right way. So if your intuition led you here, then we can receive no better compliment than that. So let us continue here and recognize that this spiral form is universal. It's everywhere, and it constitutes the entire universe and all phenomena. And from the Greeks to Nikola Tesla to Walter Russell, they all recognized that the spiral form is an essential, fundamental, foundational aspect of reality. Walter Russell in particular, with his 4D vortex science, the spiral nature of reality, and the centripetal and centrifugal forces. This is the 4D hypercube, by the way, that's spinning there. That AUM is universal. It is both physical and metaphysical. It has physical and metaphysical expressions. But it is essentially the Tao. Specifically related to Walter Russell, he referred to centrifugal as radiation, and that can be described as the creating universe appears from one, and the centripetal generation, that the universe disappears back into one. And he said, quote, "All direction is curved and all curvature is spiral." And Walter Russell's book, A New Concept of the Universe, is, in our opinion, a must read for anybody. Certainly any esotericist, but any scientist, any physicist, really anyone and everyone in the 21st century should read A New Concept of the Universe. It should be taught in schools. It is that important a book, because the key to the fourth dimension, the key to overcoming all of the physical limitations and all of the glass ceiling of physical science, materialist science, the key to unlocking all of it is in that book, is in the comprehension of Walter Russell's 4D vortex science. On meditating on and comprehending the AUM of life as it expresses in the fourth dimension, in electromagnetism, and how it creates what we experience as electromagnetism, and everything on the electromagnetic spectrum is created out of the oppositional pressures of radiation and gravitation, or generation, centripetal and centrifugal forces in the actual Akash itself. That creates that what we experience and describe as electricity and electromagnetic field. And it makes sense, right? Because it's all vibration and it's all frequency. And it's all basically the harmonics of the increasing notes on the octaves with each progressive spiral. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I'll never forget as a child watching a cartoon show on the Mighty Adventures of Hercules, and when Hercules put on his ring, and he put on his, and he became Hercules, all the lightning bolts from Olympus and everything came into his ring. But then one of the things is that the ring, sent out these waves, this wave of sound in these waves, like when you drop a pebble in a pond. And that active radiation, that spiral radiation, comes out of all of us. But equally, the active gravitation, generation, the centripetal forces, creates that torus electromagnetic field that we experience, that many people can feel when you enter into someone's electromagnetic field and so on. We share electromagnetic fields. We're all just experiencing the AUM of life, these two forces. Azazel says, He who has known the world has found a corpse, and he who has found a corpse, the world is not worthy of him. Gospel of Thomas. Okay, he who has known the world has found a corpse, and he who has found a corpse, the world is not worthy of him. All right, for the benefit of others, you can feel free to pop on and explain that one. But we know where Thomas is getting at, but that's anyway. We'll maybe come back to that in a bit. We're going to continue on with where we're going here. Okay, so the spiral, of course, the Fibonacci sequence, we see it everywhere. Spiral galaxies, spiral seashells, weather patterns. It's everywhere. It's the Tao. And even though Lao Tzu said the Tao that can be described is not the eternal Tao, all expressions of the one Tao are all analogous. So mathematicians can set all kinds of formula describing this spiral or that spiral, or we can explain this and explain that, and we will only ever be describing an expression of the Tao, an analogy. So the Tao itself cannot be described, but so the Aum of Life is beyond all description. But any and all expressions of that Tao are analogous, and those analogies can be described. And each one of those analogies can lead one directly to the Tao. But the Tao itself cannot be explained. It's sort of like love. You can experience love, and there are an infinite different expressions of love. And each one of those expressions, if they move you, can move you to a place of love, where you are in the space of love, and it can experience love and know love through that expression. But that expression can never encapsulate or fully describe the nature of love. That's the Tao. Benjamin says here, I think the quote that Azazel has shared means that there is no life in the physical world, but the spirit is the one that animates physical matter. Just my opinion. All right, fair enough. This definitely has to do with the expression being in the world, but not of the world. That's as simple as we can describe it. One who knows that all of this is impermanent and none of this really matters. And we say that with a pun, right? It doesn't really matter. Matter isn't really, right? Matter, it can't matter because matter can't. Matter isn't. It's an illusion. It's Maya. And one who knows that and lives by that, generally speaking, is not worthy of those who are still stuck in it. Because that's why the speakers of truth are always persecuted and martyred and, nailed to the cross. And as Azazel says, yes, that spirit is what the rest of the world is not worthy of. He says, yeah, it's my favorite gospel for a reason. It is quite amusing. And remember, Thomas was the doubting Thomas, right? He's one of the apostles that the most Christians look down upon, because that particular incident in which Jesus says, happy are those who are have not seen and yet believe, and it's interpreted, it's twisted by the Catholics, who of course were the first, the first indoctrinated, canonized Christianity, when they threw out all the Gnostic Gospels. So of course they're going to throw out the Gospel of Thomas, especially because with that mistranslation and misinterpretation of how they teach that episode, where Thomas demanded to see the wounds in Jesus's arms and his legs before, and to see the wound in his side before he would believe that he rose from the dead. Thomas, all the different apostles represent different aspects of our being, the 12 individuated aspects of our being. Thomas is one of them. And Thomas represents that aspect of the being which demands self-evident experiential knowledge. That is an aspect of the being that says, no, I'm not here to believe. I'm here to know directly, consciously, through experience. Show me. Where's the evidence? Show me. Allow me to experience and know for myself. That is gnosis. That is self-evident experiential knowledge. That is what we seek. Thomas represents that aspect of our innermost being, which pushes us past belief, which pushes us past dogma and theory and opinion and, quote, my truth, and instead moves us towards the truth, objective reality, and experiencing that and knowing that for ourselves. Okay, moving on here. When we say that AUM is expressed, and not just about spirituality, it's expressed throughout nature, and one way in which it's expressed is in the immune system. So this is an expression of AUM in microcosm in the physical body, where we can experience an explosion of pathogens. Let's make this bigger. Explosion of pathogens in the physical body, which leads to an implosion in wellness. So, likewise, then, to combat this, we have an expansion of the immune system response can lead to an implosion in the number of pathogens, in the population of pathogens, parasites, and an expansion of wellness, and a synthesis of immunity. So we can, as the immune system combats and battles an explosion of pathogens, it mobilizes and expands the immune response, and inflammation and all of the other symptoms of illness, as our immune system fights off the dis-ease, or the parasite, the pathogen. And then what we end up with is a strengthened immune system. Through the experience of doing that, the immune system is able to synthesize antibodies and so on and so forth to be able to deal with such pathogens again in the future. So in other words, we get experience-based immunity. An experience-based immunity is just the immune system's version of self-evident experiential knowledge. So Yeshe, we just covered that. Perhaps you missed it, but the quote about the corpse is the importance of being in the world, but not of the world, right? If you are in the world and you know that material reality is just an illusion, and you don't identify and you don't attach yourself to material reality, including the physical body, you know it's a corpse. You know it's dead. It's just dead matter being animated. It doesn't really exist. It's an illusion. It's a concept in the mind. But if you know that and live by that, then you are at a level that most other people are not, and therefore you're not worthy of them. That's why, we covered this just a few minutes ago. So, but basically, it's like being in the world, but not of the world. So again, self-evident experiential knowledge is what we seek, in the same way that the immune system seeks to do what it does, to expand itself and synthesize new knowledge, new capacities. So we have the upward spiral of synthesis and expansion, and the downward spiral of explosion and implosion. So for example, an explosion in anger, when we think about this in psychological terms, an explosion of anger will lead to an implosion of relationship. But an expansion of consciousness can synthesize new knowledge. And in the same way that the immune system is designed to rid the body of physical bodies, we have a metaphysical immune system that can help rid our metaphysical bodies of pathogens. In the physical body, we call them pathogens, parasites. But in the metaphysical body, these pathogens are egos. These are our eyes, or psychological aggregates, also known as sins, nafs, demons, devils, of all sorts of names for that which infects our psychology and our different metaphysical bodies. So in the same way that the first step of the immune system is monitoring and detection, we have mindfulness, also known as self-observation. And then the immune system gets alerted to the pathogen in the same way that we diagnose the ego that we are observing. So that could be anger, fear, lust, pride, shame, gluttony, laziness, etc. Next, the immune system will mobilize a response that is analogous to us analyzing the ego, trying to determine its nature. And we do that in meditation. And next, after mobilizing the response, the immune system determines the nature of the threat and then synthesizes a response and eliminates the threat. And that's, in psychological terms, that's synthesis, that's comprehension. Next, the immune system will clean up the remnants of the threat, and that's catharsis, related to the psychology. And then we follow up in the immune system with repairing and restoring the damage. And for psychologically speaking, that's the liberation of consciousness, the restoration of consciousness. So the physical body has to restore itself to its previous state, and the psychology restores itself, restores the consciousness which had been bottled up inside of that ego. So there's a direct one-to-one relationship here between how the immune system operates and how our psychological immune system operates. Well, this is the AUM of psychology and the AUM of immunity. It's just AUM. It's that spiral circular ENSO, right? It's that same pattern. And where we generate experience-based immunity from the immune system, we generate self-evident experiential knowledge, and that's that which we seek, self-knowledge. And these are congruent. These are analogous. But whereas the immune system is mechanical and is an expression of AUM in mechanical nature, and the immune system operates more or less automatically by itself. Now, we don't have to think about the immune system. The AUM of psychology is conscious, because the AUM of psychology takes place in the metaphysical body, in the mental body, the etheric body, the astral body, the mental body. And so there is no mechanical way for the AUM of psychology to operate. But the AUM of immunity operates in the physical body. Well, that is mechanical and is governed by mechanical nature. And that's the difference. Now, what happens if we fail to observe the AUM of psychology? Okay, Benjamin says, I think a relaxed or calm state is the prerequisite for the AUM of psychology and immunity. So that brings us to what we talked about last week in terms of relaxation and being calm and remaining relaxed is one of the essential practices. And that's true, because if you're agitated, how can you observe objectively? Your mind is going to be racing, and you're just going to be, if you're tense, you're not open and you're not aware. And if you're under stress, I mean, that's why disease is called dis-ease. Stress itself can cause disease. Stress itself puts stress on the immune system, just as it does, and psychological stress can have its effect on the physical body. And because we're going to be talking about technology here just in a moment, you know that if you overwhelm your computer, if you stress your computer and you tell it to do too many things all at once, you can actually cause your computer physical distress. You can overheat your computer, you can overload the motherboard, you can overload the hard drive. You can actually cause physical damage to a computer by overusing it. And the psychology is the same way, right? The mind-body connection is very intimate in that way. But let's continue on with this technological analysis, and we'll see just how relevant it is. So in computers, we have anti-malware or antivirus software. Now, antivirus software functions very much like the physical immune system, and the first step is monitoring and detection. And it's used to deal with malware. In the same way, we can think of our egos as psychological malware. And the first step is monitoring and detection. Now, if you don't do that, you essentially shut down your whole anti-malware suite. Your antivirus software, if it's not monitoring your system in real time, then it can't do any of the subsequent processes, because it's a process. It's a methodology. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6. And if you leave out the first step, then the whole thing just gets shut down. And the same is true for the AUM of psychology. If we don't practice mindfulness or self-observation, we also become a vulnerable human machine, in the same way that our computer is a vulnerable machine. And what we are vulnerable to is the self-interest of self-interest entities. So that's why people who are very selfish, people who are ruled by their ego, are also very not self-aware. They're unaware of themselves. They don't know themselves. That's what makes them selfish, because they're overrun with the self-interested entities. And they're identified and attached and indulgent of these this malware, this psychological malware, these egos. Now, the thing about these self-interested entities, right? They always present themselves as our friend, that they're on our side. And we know this just by observing ourselves. But we also know it by observing malware or other scams on the internet, because often the malware gets into our computer by promising us something, offering us something. Oh, it's you download a movie from the internet. Well, nothing, you think you're downloading a movie for free, but really that movie is riddled with spyware and adware and malware and viruses that are going to, crawl in your hard drive and try to find credit card numbers and all sorts of other things. So it's like a Trojan horse. And our egos are no different. Our fear, and again, observe yourself. You know that all your defects and vices, you can rationalize those until the cows come home. Well, who's doing the rationalization there if not the ego themselves? Rationally manipulating your intellect, manipulating your mind, and rationalizing their very existence and why you should indulge them. Oh, that's okay. You can have more of this, you can have more of that. That's all. You don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. You'll do it tomorrow. You have plenty of time, right? Procrastination, addictions, obsessions, all the rest of it. We can rationalize every crime under the sun and turn on the news, listen to some politicians, listen to them talk, and rationalize every crime committed against this humanity. Everybody always has reasons for doing what they do, and they're always so convincing, and they're always so convinced themselves of why they're doing what they're doing. Even the global elite think they're doing us a favor, believe it or not. They think they have our best interests at heart in their own twisted, rationalized way. But that's the nature of malware. That's the nature of parasites. That's how self-interested entities work. In order to get their way, they give the people what they want. Tell the people what they want to hear. It's the same for false gurus. Right? They always bring their spirituality packaged in such a way that, oh my God, it's exactly what we want to hear, because they'd say you can do whatever the hell you want and it's all good and we're all here to experience and blah, 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 and this and that. You can do all the mushrooms and psychedelics and have all the sex and, have all the orgasms you want and everything else. It's all good because it's all God. What is that? That's just carte blanche, an invitation and a rationalization to fall into temptation, to identify, and to indulge all the causes of suffering, all the desires. Benjamin chimes in and says, yes, that would be a bad comparison, haha, because the immune system in us is mechanical. Now, but it's a good comparison. It's just we have to point out that, like anti-malware, you have to run it, you have to do it. Like if your malware software, if you turn it off, your anti-malware software can't protect you. Likewise, if you don't practice mindfulness, if you don't practice self-observation, your innermost being, your consciousness, you can't protect yourself from your egos. And that's why all those people out there, and that's why we have the zombie apocalypse, because all the sleepwalkers, all the people asleep, they just think they're going and living their lives. They're all being manipulated and controlled by self-interested entities. And that's what makes them self-interested. That's why the majority of people are so selfish. Benjamin says, a good example of self-interested entities is the religious leaders of the mega churches. They present themselves as helpers, saviors, but they really want money, power, and control, and politicians as well. Couldn't have said it better ourselves. I'm just sad that they are stealing the power of the scriptures to heal the people and uplift them, to manipulate the weak people who don't read the scriptures. Well, but again, that's what self-interested entities do, right? What does malware do? Well, okay, Benjamin, I'm going to come back to your comment in just a few minutes because we're going to address this directly. And so we don't want to keep repeating ourselves. But as Azo says, people wanted the opposite rhetorics after the Second World War, and that's what they got. They're not so keen on dealing with the consequences of that reality, though. Yes, the Second World War was a springboard for all kinds of changes. And well, we can get into that in more detail. But again, that's something that self-interested entities will do, right? They will create catastrophic cascading failures. Why? In order to establish and set up a new regime, a new modus operandi. And that's exactly what self-sabotaging behavior and self-sabotaging egos do inside of us. Benjamin chimes in and says, oh yes, taxation, income tax started in World War II. Okay, so let's see if we can't address some of these in using our analogous ultimate methodology, because the beauty of AUM, because AUM is analogous, and like we said, every expression is an analogy. We can learn so much by distilling something down and looking at a very simple model. That's what the power of analogy is. Understanding World War II and all the political complexities in history and all the competing histories and rewritten histories and all that kind of stuff, you can spend a lifetime going through that stuff trying to get to the truth. But using the analogous ultimate methodology, all you have to do is find the analogous expression and say, there it is. Then you can go back to World War II, strip away all the superfluous, and then you can find all the key elements that map on to the AUM of Life and say, that was the process. So let's look at that. So if an ego or a self-interested entity is left unchecked, okay, they multiply. So the self-interested entity, and by self-interested entity, we can be a malware or an ego, right? Because it's analogous, doesn't matter. Or it can be a parasite, a pathogen in the body. They're all analogous. So to control and exploit system resources, for example, on the computer, in order to multiply themselves. That's what a virus does. That's what malware does. It seeks to control and exploit system resources in order to replicate itself. In the same way, an ego seeks to control and exploit human resources to make copies of itself, to strengthen itself, and increase its stranglehold over us. On this basis, a malware seeks to control and exploit networks and devices and more system resources in order to spread beyond that particular computer into other networks and other computers. And in the same way, the egos do the same thing. Through this thing that we call the private sector, they seek to control and exploit human and natural resources. Now think about that, right? A corporation, we call it private sector incorporated. A corporation just seeks to control and exploit more human and natural resources. And this is how you see egos, the effect of egos, as within, so without. As goes the microcosm, so goes the macrocosm. Because a corporation is a person under the law. That's what a corporation is legally. A corporation is a person. Even if it has 100,000 employees and 12 people on the board of directors and 120 senior vice presidents, it doesn't matter. Under the law, that corporation is one person. So do you see how this maps one-to-one on each other? As the egos go inside the psychology of one person, for example, someone like Steve Jobs or Zuckerberg, Mark Zuckerberg, or Bill Gates, so it expands and seeks that same control and exploitation in the macrocosm in the world. Yeah, nice one, Benjamin. Corporation is a corpse or a dead body, I guess. Julie shared a link here. Unfortunately, it's in the chat. I can't click it. I can only put it on screen, so I can't show anybody what it is. Maybe if you can put it in the private chat, I might be able to cut and paste it from there and see what that link is all about. But anybody else, you should be able to click the link that Julie shared here. It's in the chat. All right, but it also gets worse than that, because the egos spread and infect to control and exploit even more human and natural resources, because we not just have the private sector, we also have, of course, the public sector. And if the last 2 years have been any indication, right, with the whole COVIDiacy and the how the culpability of governments and bureaucracies, and how politicians and governments like our own Trudeau, for example, just bending over backwards to the will of these, just the Black Lodge of egos and their designs and desires for this earth and this humanity. And that's why we have this public and private sector, which is all about control and exploitation of human and natural resources. Now, they will talk about preservation of natural resources and that whole green movement and that whole green elitism and everything else, because that is a way for them to control us, and it is a way for them to keep control over those resources. You see, they want those resources for themselves. As soon as they realize that resources are in finite supply and they see the population going up, they immediately get spooked and they get possessed by fear. And so they want to control and clamp down, and they want to hoard all of those natural resources for themselves. So naturally, they go and concoct all kinds of rationalizations about why, oh, no, beef is no good. We can't have beef cattle roaming around eating grass, being natural and beautiful and sacrificing their lives, which is what else is a cow supposed to do, right? We can't have that. No. We're gonna feed you all insects, or we're gonna create this hyper processed industrial mock meat, right? Oh, I can't believe it's not beef, right? These vegan, vegetarian, chemical, nightmarish concoctions, right? Oh, that's what we're gonna feed you, right? We're one step away from Soylent Green. If you want to watch that movie from the late 60s, early 70s, starring Charlton Heston. It's a sci-fi movie, and I won't give it away, but we're one step away from that. But again, what we're showing here, and what's really key takeaway, is everything that's happening out there. Remember, out there is an illusion. It's all really happening in here. It can't happen out there unless it happens in here, because we are the microcosm. That's where the egos exist. Egos don't exist in a corporation. That's a fabrication. Under the law, it's a person, but it's not a real person. There are real people in it. And those real people have egos in them. So the egos are always in people. They're never out there. They're always in here. It's just that that's another aspect of how egos operate. That's another aspect of the parasite and the malware. They're always using misdirection, and they're always distracting us. And the one thing that the egos love to do is, because they're in here, they don't want to be seen. They don't want to be observed. So what do? They blame. They project. It's always somebody else's fault. And you see, this, what you're seeing on the screen now, this dynamic is how one of the favorite ways that egos keep a stranglehold over humanity, by creating this externalized structure and systems of oppression and repression and suppression and all of these external systems, the private sector, corporations, elites, the disparity between rich and poor, and then you have the corrupt governments and all the nonsense that happens out there in the world, and all these so-called bad actors and malevolent actors out there in the world. Why? So that over here on the right-hand side here, individuals can point fingers and lay blame and play the victim. And then the egos, remember, egos are inside, they're untouched, they're unquestioned, they're unchallenged. Their rule over the individual goes unchecked and unchallenged. Why? Because they've hypnotized that individual into falling into the trap of all kinds of conspiracy theories and blaming the other side, blaming Republicans or Democrats, or it's always out there like, my life sucks because of somebody else, because of the system, because of systematic racism, because of this, because of that, because of the other thing. It's always out there. It's always out there in the world. That's why the ego, the Black Lodge, creates all that mess out in the world. Not because it's trying to rule us with that mess. No, it's trying to distract us with the mess so it can rule us from within. In the same way that for those elite, think back to prior to the French Revolution, okay, when the aristocracy was facing the masses, their anger growing, right? The aristocracy was like, oh, what have we ever done to these people? Right? Oh, they should be happy with what they have. Just like nowadays, you'll hear economists talk about how that abject poverty, we've lifted more people out of abject poverty than any other time in history, and that economically people are so well off right now, and and this and that, and they will spew all these characteristics about why life is so good, because they're rationalizing for themselves how this mess of a system that they created is actually really good, and people should be happy with it. And how dare they rise up, and how dare they complain? Who are they to complain? Again, a externalized opposition to distract these people from doing any serious self-reflection, whether they're elite, whether they're intellectuals, whoever they are, or they're SJWs or the woke, they're whoever. Because let's face it, the entire woke movement is nothing but a gigantic exercise in victimization and victim mentality. And now, and the systematic politicization and orchestration and creating a structured a structure around that, much like communism was, right? And all of it is designed so that the egos can maintain, our egos, yours and mine, can maintain their rule over us. unchecked, unfettered, unknown, unobserved. Because so long as you and I are blaming somebody else out there, we're not blaming ourselves for our own unhappiness. And if we're not looking at ourselves, if we're not looking for the causes of our unhappiness within ourselves, then we're not looking at our egos, we're not observing ourselves, we're not practicing mindfulness, we're not practicing the AUM of life, and we are on the downward spiral to not being. The egos rule. That's the hard truth. But that's what this slide reveals. And that's why the AUM of life is so essential a construct, and why we are here to give this knowledge to the world, because with all due respect to the Bhagavad Gita and its practical spirituality and its framework of 4 aspects of yoga, yes, you have to read 1,000 pages of the Bhagavad Gita and go through the epic tale of the characters. And even then, people miss the point. They just think it's empty mythology, right? They miss all the conflict and war and what it really is all about, the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is taking place within you and within me, in our own psychology. But that's why this is so important to give to the world, to comprehend, to understand. Because this is self-evident. This is objective experiential knowledge. You cannot deny the bad actors out in the world. Where do they come from? They don't exist out in the world. They do not exist. They only exist. That self-interest exists only within the self. There is no self-interest outside of the self. Okay, we've got some comments here. We better back up and share them before we get too far out of whack. Okay, so Cassandra says, I've known another who took these concepts and never examined self, but instead hyperfixated and exacted judgment and cruelty, as if judge and executioner of my well-being towards me, never understanding all along the exploration and identification was best to be utilized for self. Now that I understand these practices more each day, I understand to humbly thank, but back away from such misuse, and to also self-explore and examine and realign when I see my misalignment to source. Well, that's right, because when you have dis-ease in the body, the symptoms, right? You're thrown out of balance, you're thrown out of whack. That is there to draw your attention to the fact that you are sick and you need to rest, you need to heal, you need to cleanse, you need to work with the immune system. So if you need to sweat, sweat. If you need to rest, rest. If you need to vomit, vomit, right? You're working with the immune system. You're aware of that because you are aware of the symptoms. You are aware that you are sick. Same thing psychologically. Our suffering is there and our stress is there. Our psychological dis-ease is there to draw our attention, to bring our attention back to ourselves and to focus on self-observation and identification, the diagnosis of the egos and analysis of the egos that are responsible for our psychological dis-ease, the psychological malware that's messing up the works, right? So that's why we suffer, and that's why we have stress and anxiety and depression, because these are the symptoms that draw our attention to the underlying cause that we then practice the AUM of life with, right? Self-observation, self-remembering, meditation, and so on. And again, we'll get into more of the details on that. Julie says, as we walk through the valleys and as we walk through the valleys in the shadow of death, taming our demons, seek to know thyself, begin to recognize all the lies, and once again, time breaks down the walls. Reconnect with friends, and the chains and the elements speak as we interact, remove impurities, change, react relationships, and all worldly interactions. What is life and what brings us satisfaction? We create, we forgive, we absorb, we are overcome, expel, cast a spell, ring the iron bell, loose connection. Okay. What you are saying is so true. What cut off the end of that big first post was that New Age people get more complacent and unaware as each to their own takes over. Who are they to judge? And if you are to judge or keep it real, as now, there is not only no thinking, there is no logic. Now we are the arrogant Hitlers with no empathy, no matter how vulnerable you made yourself in the conversation. That is what it comes down to. It's like this. There is no other way out. People say, well, that's your opinion and don't need to do it just because you said or feel that way. It doesn't make it so, but knowing actually, it does make it so. Whether you believe me or not, that is the problem. So the longer it takes for you to face your ego, I have to suffer and have it all fall back on me. And the good people doing the service are essentially hung in the town square. So there's many. Look, the ego is so clever and it's so subtle. And remember, it's self-interested. And ego's number one self-interest is survival. Its nature is fear, the fear of death. And so, of course, it's New Age and so many other aspects of so-called spirituality doesn't focus on this in any capacity, because it doesn't want people to focus on this, because it's pseudo-spirituality, right? The people want to have their cake and eat it too. People want to be able to ascend into the higher dimensions with their personality intact, right? They don't realize that what they are here and now, this physical body, this personality, is a character in a video game, right? How ridiculous would it be for you to create a character in World of Warcraft and then expect for that character to leave the computer and enter into the real world, and for you to be able to walk around in the real world as your World of Warcraft character? It's ridiculous. It's absolute ludicrous. But you can't get through to these people because they're so blinded by their self-interest, by their ego. Okay, let's move along here, because we've still got quite a bit of way to go. So what we're of course talking about is the in microcosm and in macrocosm, and the question is how, right? So how does ego, which is shaitan or Satan, the adversary, the singular ego of the false self, which is an amalgamation of egos fighting for dominance in our psyche. And so if we think of a game of King of the Hill, and we think of the mouth of Sauron, right? That's the character in Lord of the Rings that comes out and speaks for Sauron. Well, we have the mouth of ego, and ego's fighting for dominance of our psyche via hypnotic voices of many eyes. So lust, for example, will say, lust is the mother of all desire. Through craving, we'll say, I want this, and aversion, I do not want that. And then we have the ego of pride, for instance. And then through hypnosis, identification, I am the best, and rejection, I am the worst. Fear works with deceit, deception. The rationalization, my security is vital, and irrationality, I am always in peril. Let's go. Oh, and then again, through pain, through the mind, heart, and body, beliefs, emotions, and sensations. I must have pleasure, and I must avoid suffering. And this really should also be fear, but anyway, we'll just go with it. The greed or hunger for power to control consciousness, and then lust to exploit and consume our vital energy. So this is how egos manipulate and control us as individuals. And this is what in microcosm gets projected into the macrocosm. So we have the corruption of private and public institutions, which results in mass hypnosis and exploitation of human and natural resources in macrocosm. But it's this little game of king of the hill, this dominance hierarchy that's taking place within the psychology of individuals that gets projected into and corrupts these institutions. It's individuals that corrupt institutions. It's no such thing as a corrupt institution. And the very same egos will organize and to destroy the corrupt private and public institutions that they created and call for dismantling of the very institutions they corrupted. So this is the game that egos play. They will corrupt institutions and they will bring civilization to the brink of total disaster. And then on the other side, they will create the resistance, the rebellion, the revolt to bring it all crashing down. That's its modus operandi, right? Divide and conquer. So egos do not stop there, nor do they give up their hold on humanity. So through the mask of altruism and social justice, egos give rise to the very tribalism and identity politics we see today. Okay, we call it woke. So what woke really is the passive-aggressive weaponization of victim mentality for the redistribution of power to competing tribal groups. Woke is analogous to egos. And that's why Michel Foucault, one of the fathers, the grandfathers of the woke movement of postmodernism, he was all obsessed with the dominance hierarchy. Why? Because that's what takes place within the psychology of individuals that we already showed. But really, they're just puppets, right? Things like the World Economic Forum and United Nations and George Soros and Bill Gates and all the rest of them, which themselves are just useful idiots. These same egos instigated the fall of the decadent Roman Empire and created the warring states and tribal feudalism of medieval Europe. The same egos led to the fall of the high civilizations of the Americas. The Inca, the Maya, the Aztec, the Olmec, the Toltec, the Zapotec, the Nazca, the Tiwanaku, the Wari, the Mississippian, and created the myriad warring tribes and nations of the Americas. That's North America and South America. So the question is why? But before we answer that, a couple quick chats here. Azazel says, our innermost is basically the Diablo player of our vessel. Yes, that's correct. Cassandra says, FOG elicited fear, earthly obligation, exacted guilt. FOG elicited fear, earthly obligation, exacted guilt. Okay. I see. FOG elicited fear, earthly obligation, and exacted guilt. Okay. Benjamin says, subtle as a kidney pain. You mean, this was in comment to how subtle the ego is. Subtle as a kidney pain. Well, you know what? You'd be surprised just how subtle the ego can be. So observe yourself and observe others who are trapped in ego and don't know it. And if you try to explain it to them, you can't get through to them because they just can't see it. Cassandra says, be aware when you sense being subjected to fear, earthly obligation, and exacted guilt. All right, so the question of, why is all this, why is ego out to destroy and build up and destroy? And well, because mechanical nature works on the law of the pendulum. What goes up must come down. The oscillation of mechanical nature is there, right? There's life and there's death. We have the seasons. This is just how mechanical nature works, and egos work for mechanical nature. So we have the oscillation between pleasure and pain, craving and aversion. We have the fight or flight, force or fawn, birth and death, growth and decay, maturity and aging, synthesis and entropy, thesis and antithesis, evolution and devolution. It is this spiral nature of the AUM of life enacted on the level of mechanical nature, and egos function and assist mechanical nature in its proper function. In the very large and the very small. It's just its nature. So, on the upward spiral of evolution, on the physical plane, you have egos that are a part of that process. But then, once a civilization reaches maturity, the ego switches and goes into prominence, where before it was in the background, but now it's in the prominence, and is responsible for the devolution. So whereas the AUM of Psychology works through the being and conscious efforts to consciousness and gnosis, and the awakening and the master over ego through our conscious human nature, the ego works in the opposite direction and causes the fall to an enslavement to ego, the falling of sleep, leading hypnosis and ignorance, and devolution and effortless entropy to not being. And that's the important part. It's easier to fall than it is to climb. That's what all Shakespearean tragedy and all tragedies of any kind in literature and art and philosophy and history have shown us, that the AUM of Psychology and the upward spiral is a difficult journey. It's much more difficult to build the pyramids than it is to tear them down, because the pyramids have been decayed. Well, first of all, the outer stones of the pyramid were looted for other buildings by the later Egyptians. But then, time and entropy would just, effortlessly break everything down. Everything decays and dies. It takes no effort for anybody to grow old. Right? Aging takes no effort. Staying in shape takes effort. Eating well takes effort. Keeping the mind sharp takes effort. But the forces of aging, that takes no effort, right? Because everybody's going to age and die. You can't tell me that 100% of the population is so diligent with their aging process. No. But that's the difference between our conscious human nature and mechanical ego nature. And that's the relationship between the different spirals, the upward spiral and the downward spiral. So on the upward spiral, we have Moses raising the serpent of bronze. And on the downward spiral, we have Pharaoh leading his people to ruin in the pursuit of Moses and the Israelites. So when we talk about the fall, so this is from Adam and Eve to Macbeth to Faust to Darth Vader. This is the universal tale of the fall. The downward spiral and fall due to ego is universal in microcosm. And from scripture to mythology to fantasy and science fiction, the stories reveal the fall both in microcosm and in macrocosm. So in scripture, you have, like, for example, the fall of Babylon. And mythology, we have the fall of Troy. And from fantasy and science fiction, so like how many post-apocalyptic science fiction movies are there, and so on. All stories of genuine worth warn us of the fall of humanity. As goes the microcosm, all right, so goes the macrocosm. All stories of genuine worth also give us the keys to preventing the fall. And we know from Joseph Campbell, you enter the forest at the darkest point where there is no path. Where there is a way or path, it is someone else's path. You are not on your own path. If you follow someone else's way, you are not going to realize your potential. This is from The Hero with a Thousand Faces. All stories of genuine worth reflect the hero's journey. A story sees the hero facing baffling challenges, struggles, suffering, and ordeals. That's the AUM of Life expressed through what Joseph Campbell called the heroic journey. And it's always for self-evident experiential knowledge. And that's the spiral, but the spiral ladder, right? Jacob's ladder, Dante's ladder. That's Dungeons and Dragons. That's descending into the dungeon to kill monsters and gain experience points and increase levels. That's Perseus. Perseus going down into the labyrinth to kill Medusa, and Theseus going into the labyrinth to kill the Minotaur. And of course, it's Frodo and Sam going on their epic journey to Mount Doom, descending into the very heart of Mordor to undo the ring of power, which is one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. It was Elrond, who told Isildur to cast it into the fire and destroy it, and Isildur said no. But that's our mission, that's our job. We have to cast into the fire and destroy our own ring of power. We have to go on our own heroic journey to cast it into the fire and destroy the great I. Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars. It's Khalil Gibran. Who has not passed through the inferno of their passions has never overcome them. That's Carl Jung. And the purpose of life is finding the largest burden you can bear and bearing it. That's Jordan Peterson. So a fellowship led by ISAM, by individuals seeking the analogous ultimate methodology in microcosm, so wisdom, integrity, honesty, temperance, compassion, loyalty, sacrifice, courage, and humility, can restore the realm in macrocosm. And transform hypnosis by the One Ring and exploitation of Middle Earth into a restored culture of individuals seeking the analogous ultimate methodology in macrocosm. This is really that aspect of the Atlas project that we started focusing on over the past few weeks. Because there is an army here on this earth. We talked about them a couple weeks ago, the light workers, the star seeds, all these people that have been born. Perhaps you feel yourself among them, was born with a mission to help this earth and to help others and to sacrifice for humanity. So just like in Lord of the Rings, there's the Fellowship of the Ring and a small group of key characters who work toward the liberation of Middle Earth. So too, the Army of World Salvation and the Atlas Project has that similar task to do. And that's why, for our part, we're working and bumbling our way through the messaging. And, every time we come on here, we try to just speak from our heart and come from a new perspective or a different way of showing it or a different way of expressing it or a slight alteration of how we express it into a form that we can, at the very least, connect to this fellowship that's out there in the world that needs inspiration and needs leadership and to organize behind a movement, behind a project, behind an organized and united front for the sake of this suffering humanity. Because the One Ring, the adversary, our demons, our egos, and the hell they create exist to be conquered on our hero's journey to save Earth in microcosm and macrocosm. Our personal story reflects the hero's journey. Life is baffling, so challenges, struggles, suffering are needed. What this is showing here is how baffles create living water. We've discussed this many times, and how living structured water is so much more potent and powerful. It's better water. It's superior water, but it can only become strong, superior, structured living water, alive, if it faces baffles, if it faces turbulence, if it goes through this process. And it's that same process that we all go through, facing any struggle, any challenge, any learning process. Like Atlas in formation itself. This is the Atlas project in formation. You're witnessing it. Each and every time we do one of these live streams, each and every time we do another presentation or another slideshow or another video, we are and getting feedback and seeing, did it make an impact? Did it not make an impact? Does it speak to people? Do they resonate with it? Do they not resonate with it? It's our facing these obstacles and challenges and baffles and constantly refining and exercising and practicing that messaging and seeing what hits and what doesn't. That's like anybody learning anything, practicing anything. You have to do it. There's the only way to learn something is by doing. So individuals seeking the analogous ultimate methodology can experience, learn, grow, and gain self-evident experiential knowledge or gnosis through the same process of challenges, struggles, suffering. And these challenges and struggles and suffering are going to be coming to this humanity on a macro scale in a very big way as we move forward. And so the opportunity there is to be able to face those challenges and struggles as an upright, true human being, and to face them consciously with the faculties of metamind of being as a true human being, a triune human being, and not an intellectual animal, not a human-like machine that's going to play the victim. All right, a couple quick comments here. Julie says, it is the anti-venom or anti-Christ, for we killed Christ to avoid facing our sin. Yes, that's true. We do that on an individual basis. That's true. And certainly that was true back in Christ's day, because a bodhisattva, someone who's here walking the path of the bodhisattva, is a revolutionary. He's here to challenge. And people don't like to be challenged. And people in power don't like to have their power and authority challenged. And that's something that Christ absolutely did. I mean, he said, I'm going to tear down this temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Now, of course, he was speaking in imagery, in metaphor, in symbol. And he spoke exactly what needed to be spoken for that drama to play out, because he needed to die. He needed to be crucified. He came here to be crucified. And he did, and he said what needed to be done and what needed to be said in order for that drama to play out, so that he could die, descend into hell, and rise again 3 days later and become the master, not just the avatar of Pisces, but the master of masters for this planet. Azazel says, killing Medusa is not an easy task. No, it's not an easy task. It's certainly not as easy as it is in the mythology, is it? But it involves a mirror. That's important, right? Perseus can't gaze directly at excuse me. Perseus can't gaze directly at Medusa. He has to use a mirror. So it's already hidden in the myth that what do we use a mirror for? We use a mirror to gaze at ourselves. And so Perseus, when he's looking at Medusa's reflection in the mirror, he's also looking at himself. And that's a clue. Cassandra says, we are battered in our alignment by our suffering and struggles. Azazel says, as long as we apply it as a fellowship in the world. Yeah. And remember, even then, we can't save everybody. We can't. We can't save those that don't want to be saved, or they don't know that they're in need of saving, or who refuse to save themselves. We are bettered in our alignment by our sufferings and our struggles. Yeah, so in the same way that living water becomes structured and alive because of baffles, that in the same way we become stronger. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? You go to the gym, you lift weights, and you grow your muscles, you become stronger. You go to the pool and you swim laps, and you become better at it, and your cardiovascular fitness improves, and you become a better swimmer, right? The more you face the thing that is the obstacle, and the more you overcome it, the better you become at overcoming it. Until eventually you become, in the case of a swimmer, you become like Michael Phelps, who's like a human dolphin. And he practically just slips through the water. He just propels himself through the water like a torpedo. Right? The man has superhuman swimming ability. Or like what's his name? The Iceman, who, for whatever reason, Wim Hof, the Iceman, who he's faced cold so many times, and he just kept facing the cold and facing the cold and facing the cold, and trying everything, every breathing technique, every meditation practice, everything that he could get his hands on to keep facing the cold, ever colder, ever colder, ever colder, ever longer, ever longer, ever longer, until now he's the Iceman. But what he was really practicing was the AUM of Life. That's all he was doing. But now he says he has the Wim Hof method, right? Now I have the Wim Hof method. Now he's selling that to people, right? Because he's an expert. Because he became an expert at one expression of the AUM of Life, how to become the Iceman and how to become superhuman in terms of tolerating cold. Now he believes, to one degree or another, rightly, that you can apply the same method to other aspects of your life. And you can. And you can. Because it's just the AUM of Life. You can, if you apply the same method as Wim Hof did to becoming the Iceman, to playing the piano, right? You'll become a great concert pianist. If you have it within you, the innate talent and ability to begin with, and the passion and so on, right? But in terms of that alignment, that's what that does, right? It's like the other way to think about this from a physical perspective is a Japanese sword maker, blacksmith, who's hammering the carbon steel. He heats it up in the fire until it's glowing red, and then you hammer the steel, and then you fold it, you hammer it, and you quench it, and then you heat it up again, and you hammer and you fold, and then you quench it, and you hammer it down, and then you quench it. And this process, what you're doing is you're literally aligning the carbon atoms in the steel atoms, because the steel is fusing with the carbon that's getting from the coal when you're heating it up in the hot coals. That's why it's called carbon steel. And this process of folding it over, you're folding the charcoal, the carbon from the charcoal, into the steel, and then you're hammering it down. And as you hammer it down under that intense heat and pressure, the molecules, which are like this, they get hammered into an alignment, and they find the tongue and groove, right? The slots and the grooves that they can fit into each other, and they fit into each other, and they get bonded to become that carbon steel, that of the famous katana blade, that famous Japanese steel. But they did this over 500 times, folding a blade 500 times. Took 6 months to make a katana blade. But when you use the term alignment, understand that we are the carbon, and right, our innermost being is the steel, and the fire is the suffering, and the fire of Divine Mother Kundalini is the fire. We are the carbon. We are the carbon-based life form, right? And getting pounded on in the heat, in the fire, brings us into alignment, brings us closer and closer and closer and closer to the steel. And we find the tongue and grooves, and we find our place, and then we know our place. As Azil says, how to tolerate the cold, be a Swede or a Canadian. Do you know how many Canadians can't tolerate the cold? They're big babies, a lot of them. No, you got to go. If you go up to Northern Ontario, if you go to Winnipeg, then you find people who can tolerate the cold. Go to Northern Ontario, you find people who tolerate the cold. But where I live in Southern Ontario, lots of city goers, lots of city slickers and big babies. Oh, they don't like the cold. Oh, everybody buys cars with seat warmers in them. And nowadays, nah. We didn't have that growing up in the 80s. it took the car 10 minutes to warm up. Right? So But anyway, that's an inside joke between us Northerners. Okay. Now, one of the things that we talked about last week in terms of, now hopefully by this point, and we'll get to that summary slide. So, but you've recognized that self-observation and hopefully you've been able to recognize that part of mindfulness is transformation of impressions and the transformation of energy, and that meditation comes into the AUM of life as part of analysis and synthesis. But then what comes through catharsis and liberation, that's where pranayama and sexual alchemy come in, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail. But also, one of the things that we talked about was mantra and sound and the spiritual power of sound. So let's address that and why it's ISAUM. Individual seeking analogous ultimate methodology, yes, fine, but it's ISAUM. Okay. Is is the sound E, which is the mantra of the crown chakra and the third eye. And, under normal circumstances, I normally know the names, all the proper names of these chakras, the anahata and so on and so forth. But bear with me. We've been going at this for 2 hours, so I'm just going to use just regular terminology here because I'm so terrible with names at the best of times. So here we have the sound, the mantra E, the crown chakra and the third eye chakra, or the chakras of the head, in other words. And S, which is the mantra of the Muladhara chakra, or the root chakra, where the Kundalini sleeps coiled up 3.5 times. That's Is. Next, we have Aum. Now, the O is implicit, right? We don't have to spell it out because you can't say Aum without automatically saying O. So it's Aum. Those are the vowel sounds, the mantras of the pulmonary chakra, the chakra of the lungs, the chakra of the heart, O, the chakra of the solar plexus, U, and the prostate and uterine chakra, or the chakra of the sexual organs. In addition, we have A, which is the throat chakra. And that's, most times people don't necessarily think of it anyway, but it's the throat chakra is the esoteric here, and it's the chakra of discourse. So when we consider the throat chakra as the chakra of discourse, and the M and S, the prostate and the uterine chakra, the sexual organs, as the chakra of intercourse, E is associated with the sexual force and the sexual organs. And without getting too detailed or too graphic, okay, it is not by accident that things like dirty words and dirty language and oral sex have the prominence that they have. Okay, the chakras, the chakra related to discourse is intimately related to sexuality. As Azil says, I do think of it when it is needed, like when I get sick. There are certain vowels that get harder to pronounce when there is a blockage. And so really, it is a diagnostic tool. Yeah, fair enough. Like A, yeah. So that's something that's a good point. If you're having if you are trying to work with chakras or work with mantras, and there's a blockage in that chakra, then you're right. It'll be difficult to carry that note, even mentally, not even necessarily physically, but just mentally, or to be able to do mantra work at all, for that matter. Okay, let's continue here. What we have then, yeah, he says try saying ah without it, without if you have a dominant cough. Well, that kind of goes without saying. So E11, we have all of the sounds of all the primary chakras. So individuals seeking analogous ultimate methodology, Isaum, implicit in Isaum are all of the vowels and all of the chakras, the primary chakras. This relates directly to what we refer to as sound-empowered enlightened metaphysical science, or SEAMS. So SEAMS also uses mantras. Everything in the Atlas project, all of these abbreviations utilize sound-empowered metaphysical science. They utilize mantra. Even though the Atlas project in many ways has to present itself at a near secular level, but we've incorporated mantra into every aspect of it. And that's just what we're revealing to you today. So to see metaphysical science, so as we go through these, they're supposed to be highlighting the letters themselves. So to see metaphysical science, seems, we have E, M, and S. Then we have ecosystem advanced human habitat, or ESA. You have E, A, and S. So that's ESA. Now consider this quote. When we profoundly analyze the rune Is, which is the rune Isa, with mystical astonishment, we discover our own being, the innermost. The revolution of the consciousness would be radically impossible without the special help of our own particular adorable Divine Mother. She is in herself our own being, the root, cause, and origin of our divine spirit. Last week, we also mentioned runes. So here again, you see them mentioned, and you see the relationship, how we can incorporate aspects and elements of runes and mantras into our life and our work. And in doing so, we remember ourselves, especially if we work with, for example, the mantra Isa. And as we will see in a minute, there's C, education and culture. These are all aspects of the Atlas project. So CC, that's IS, right? So that's SISI, CC. Well, reverse that. CC In Spanish, sí is yes, yes. But if you reverse it, it's Is, Isis. That's the divine mother of the Egyptians. And education and culture is the womb from which true individuals are born. Their education and culture. That's what defines them as individuals. And so CC, yes, the affirming Isis, the motherly womb, the nurturing womb, the mother's milk, which helps us grow and develop. And that education, how important that is. And culture, how important that is. High art and beauty, and being able to comprehend symbol and allegory. That's why it's C, education and culture. And spiritually enlightened and empowered education and culture. C. Let's continue here. So Divine Mother of the Egyptian gives all we need on our hero's journey. So she is Galadriel from Lord of the Rings. She's also Mary, Maya, Maya, Shakti, Rhea, Sibyl, Adonia, Kuan Yin, Diana, Athena, Mother Nature, and any and all names for the Divine Feminine. That's Isis. All right, moving on. Additional mantras of note here are E-A-O, which is the Iao. The divine spirit is symbolized by the vowel O, which is the eternal circle. The letter I symbolizes the inner being of each human being, but both are intermingled with the letter A as a point of support. And then AUM. That's the famous mantra Om, but it's the heart mantra encompasses the whole of the torso, the heart cavity, the chest cavity, all the way from the throat all the way down to the sexual organ. So it's Aum. So that's all the organs that fall under Aum. It's a very large chakra if you meditate on it. And finally, Iaum is Santiago, St. James. Santiago or James is Mercury, the messenger of the gods and the foundational element of alchemy. That is what Iaum is, the foundation of alchemy, the foundational element of alchemy, messenger of the gods. And all of these mantras, that's the name James or Santiago, St. James, that those sounds put into activation and awaken those chakras, and those chakras are the gateways, the doorways between our terrestrial self and our supernal selves, our physical body, etheric body, astral body, mental body, causal body, Buddhic body, atmic body are all connected where the chakras of each of those bodies intersect. So by using sound, we put those chakras into activation. And by doing that, we put those bodies into activation on all levels. And that's why that's Mercury, the quicksilver, the messenger of the gods. When we work with sound, when we work with mantra, when we work with runes, it's another method of alignment, but it's specifically aligning the chakras now. And it allows us to put those bodies into activation and in order to receive information. And working with chakras and mantra also includes things like listening to classical music and also includes prayer. So, for example, prayer in meditation, and meditating while on specific chakras while working with the mantra. And there are many, many ways in which one can combine the different activities of visualization, relaxation, concentration, vocalization. And you can vocalize, of course, audibly, but you can also vocalize mentally, right? You can just like you don't have to pray out loud. You can pray silently to your innermost being, but you pray within your conscious imagination. Likewise, you can work with the mantras in the same way, uh, essentially mentally in your mind's eye or your mind's ear. So then, therefore, all primary chakras and mantras are in individuals seeking AUM. Okay, so this is just a recap that ESAUM is individuals suffering the analogous ultimate methodology on the downward spiral, psychological suffering's causes or eyes, the downward spiral of explosion and implosion to devolution and not being. And ESAUM is also the flip side, where we want to work with individuals seeking the analogous ultimate methodology. Mindfulness, diagnosis, analysis, synthesis, catharsis, and liberation of self-evident experiential knowledge to seek gnosis. On the upward spiral of expansion and synthesis to evolution and being. All right. So, we had animated all this stuff, but we're just going to get it out on the screen because we don't want to just repeat it for the sake of repeating it all. But the point here is each one of these steps, we've been discussing how the essential practices, well, really, hopefully now we've given a solid foundation of what the analogous ultimate methodology is and how it relates to the Attlas project, and how, as a structure, as a construct, or as an expression, as a framework, why it is so needed desperately by this humanity in these times. But for our purposes, last week we talked about several different essential practices, and we've mentioned a few of them here already. So, for example, under mindfulness, obviously we have self-observation and self-remembering. That's observation of the 3 brains and 5 centers, our intellectual, motor, and yeah, let's do that. You guys can see that, right? So the intellectual, the motor, and the motor instinctive sexual center. Actually, you know what? What if we did that? Intellectual, motor, instinctual, sexual. Whoops. That's not a good idea. I can't see my pointer. Let's go back to the laser pointer. There we go. So the intellectual, the emotional, and the motor, instinctual, sexual. So self-observation of the 3 brains and 5 centers and self-remembering is under mindfulness. But what also comes under mindfulness, as we were saying earlier, is transformation of impressions. So that in the moment that we have mindfulness and diagnosis, so when we are observing ourselves, we want to be able to identify what egos are operating in that moment. But that's one eye in. One eye out is whatever circumstances we're going through, whatever suffering or negativity that we're experiencing, the capacity to be able to transform that into a positive. And we touched on that on our slide, talking about life being baffling and how baffles and those tests and challenges and ordeals and struggles and suffering are what strengthen us. So even while we are facing struggles and challenges, it's like someone being in the gym. You won't get very far in the gym if every time you put yourself under some kind of strain or discomfort, you start falling into the victim mentality or the blame game or something, something stupid, right? You're going to the gym to challenge yourself. You're going to the gym to work hard. You're going to the gym to work out your muscles. If we can apply that similar type of awareness to our daily life as our Divine Mother delivers to us the psychological gymnasium of life and the tests, trials, challenges, and ordeals that we need to face, as the egos come up and are drawn to the surface and we say things and do things that we're not proud of, we have to be in observation of that, not kicking ourselves, not beating ourselves up, but just being an observation of that fact. That in that moment, when we say to ourselves, what possessed me to do that? We won't have to ask the question. We'll say, aha, okay, fear possessed me to do that. Anger possessed me to do that. Greed, jealousy, laziness, and so on. So the transformation of impressions and the ability to transform what we are experiencing and digest it consciously are an aspect of this mindfulness and this diagnosis, these first two steps of the AUM of Life. Later, in meditation, when we perform our analysis, our retrospection meditation on the day, and we play out those scenarios, again, it will be important to be able to transform impressions in that meditation so that we don't fall into the trap of blaming ourselves or blaming others, right? Playing the victim mentality or getting caught up in other thoughts or intellectualizations and all kinds of stuff, but being able to observe everything that's going on and just calmly and relaxed, always bring ourselves back to the meditation if we ever find ourselves getting distracted or being taken off on a tangent. Again, that's another aspect of the transformation of impressions, is bringing oneself back to the awareness, the pure awareness and the conscious comprehension of what's going on, instead of getting caught up in the subjective commentary about what's going on. And again, with meditation comes synthesis, that comprehension, that's step 4. Now, we talked about pranayama as an essential practice, the circulation of the sexual force, the creative energy. Now, that is important in 2 ways related to the AUM of Life. We recommended doing pranayama always before doing any type of spiritual practice, but especially before meditation, because it helps bring into alignment our our metaphysical bodies. It helps relax and helps prepare us. And if we practice the pranayama as we described it last week, which we learned from Swami Sivananda, it is a way of cultivating relaxation and concentration through the entire period that we're doing the pranayama. So it's not a forced, stressed, strenuous type of pranayama like Hamsa or how other people do. It's completely relaxed, and it's actually, last week we told you can do it on a count of, so 4 counts in breath and 6 counts out breath. It's actually much slower than that on the out breath, but you'll find your own rhythm. right? So don't lock yourself into, oh my God, don't lock yourself into the counting. Don't count. Counting is not important. The important part is that you focus and connect and remain concentrated and relaxed as you move the prana from the coccyx up the spine to the crown chakra, around to the third eye, and then into the heart chakra. And again, we're working with the chakras. And you can use Ham Sa mantra, or if you're just using Ham on the in-breath, but you can also use the individual chakras of the areas that we're dealing with. So as you hold the energy on the crown chakra around to the third eye, you can use E and then breathe it into the heart chakra, but you can go AUM, right? So you can experiment with this, but you can use mantra while you're doing pranayama. There's absolutely. But that practice of pranayama, working with prana, and the transmutation of the sexual force, like we described last week, the Vairoli Mudra, which is the sixth rite of the rites of rejuvenation, that's transmutation of the sexual force for single people. That comes into play in step 5, in catharsis, the annihilation of comprehended egos. So if our divine mother, Devi Kundalini Shakti, is not remembered and she's not worked with in an upright, intelligent way, and those fires, those energies are not active, then they cannot be applied to incinerate the egos that we have comprehended. And catharsis depends upon our divine mother's ability to eliminate said egos. And if you have the benefit of being in a relationship and you have a spouse to practice white tantra with, then that absolutely comes into play in step 5 and step 6, catharsis and liberation. Because the awakening of the Kundalini and working with the fires in the forge of Vulcan in sexual alchemy, nothing will ignite those fires in a more intense way than sexual alchemy, than white tantra with your spouse. So the ultimate goal of these 6 steps is to seek yourself, self-evident experiential knowledge of yourself, to know yourself. Because as you go through and comprehend that which you are not, but that within you, which causes you or wants to cause you to fall into the downward spiral of not being, of devolution, as you work on eliminating those and liberating consciousness, you have more capacity, more free consciousness to be more mindful, more observant, to expand your consciousness and to go deeper within yourself, to know yourself, to seek yourself. And that's how the spiral grows. You go deeper into yourself each time, and you gain a little bit more on the uptake. And that's the AUM of Life. That's this methodology, this framework, and all of the essential practices that we've discussed maps directly onto these steps. And you just keep doing it. And it's you have the essential practices and you have the framework. You know now that you're seeking to be on the upward spiral. But in order to do that, you have to do like what the immune system does. You have to cleanse yourself of all the malware. You have to cleanse yourself of all the pathogens in your psychology, in your 3 brains and your 5 centers. This is just a final summary slide that's showing all of those different aspects of the Atlas project around the. So E11 is at the top, individual seeking, analogous ultimate methodology, and then these others are. Yeah, that's not so important. That's just a summary slide. This actually presentation is just one part taken from a much, much bigger presentation, which obviously we're not going through today, and it's too much, too big. All right. Cassandra says, when we see our lack of past awareness, and so reactions to earthly hooks and plays on the ego moving towards us, and step into awareness and new ability to respond to oncoming hooks and plays, there is new self-accountability moving forward. I thank the mother for this work. It's true, because what happens as we work with this, of course, and this is self-evident. As you go around the circle, the goal of achieving liberation is to free consciousness, which then enhances and advances your capacity for mindfulness. Your mindfulness capacity grows. And also, as you gain more experience doing this, transforming impressions and diagnosing egos and performing the analysis and meditation and so on and so forth, you become faster and more proficient at doing what you say here, Cassandra, which is to recognize threats, egos moving upon us, because you're getting to know them, you're getting to know their ways, their nature, their modus operandi. You become good at sniffing them out, smelling them out. You start to develop a sixth sense, not just for your own egos, but also for the egos of others, which helps in protecting yourself from others and protecting yourself and themselves from getting triggered. If you can see the ego coming a mile away, you have the opportunity to prepare yourself so that when you can catch yourself when that ego is triggered inside of you. You can see the attack coming, and you can sense, you're at risk of having that ego triggered. But if you're ready, you can catch it. And you can avoid an unpleasant situation. It's especially true of the people you love, the ones who press our buttons better than anybody else, usually our partner or spouse or other family members, right? They're usually the ones who can press our buttons better than anyone. So the more we know ourselves and the more we practice this, and the more we've meditated on past and comprehended past times when we were triggered and when we lost control of ourselves, the better we are at adapting and responding instead of reacting. And the more we practice transformation of impressions combined with this, even if someone insults us, even if someone attacks us, or even if someone is being passive aggressive, we are in a much better position to respond consciously rather than allow ourselves to react mechanically out of ego. All right. Well, that honestly is where we, as far as we really saw ourselves getting today. So we just open it up to questions at this point, as usual, or comments, or If anybody wants to pop online and share a few words or something like that, now's the time to do it, because our goal was to be able to offer a framework, which is the framework that we are going to be moving forward with for this humanity. And in addition to some additions that we've made along the way, for example, the triune human being, the meta-minded being, like that other video that we created. But the AUM of Life is still a part of that half an hour video. But we had this presentation, done over a year ago. And because we had it at our disposal, but we hadn't used it in any video or in any way. But we felt that last week's live stream, as valuable we hope as it was in laying out all the different essential practices, we felt we were doing ourselves a disservice, as well as you, not providing you our contemporary framework, a framework that is ultimately more simplified in some ways, but also it's more fundamental. Because I think it's very important for our ability to communicate to those who are not well versed in the spiritual path, or those who have a very different understanding of spirituality. They have been misled and misguided, or they have some sort of other, whatever conceptual or dogmatic beliefs that they have, or whatever philosophical framework they're coming from. Maybe they're not even coming from a so-called spiritual framework. They're just coming from some kind of a philosophical or sociological or biological or technological framework, right? Because AUM is foundational to all of it. And it covers both sides, evolution and devolution, as it must, as it has to, as the Tao does. But it puts it in very, very practical terms. And it's not that you're avoiding the downward spiral. Is that you're recognizing that the whole reason why it is there, the elements that create it psychologically within us, the whole reason why it's there is for us to be able to have an upward spiral. You can't have an upward spiral without a downward spiral. You can't. You can't only have half the Tao. This is what the Bodhisattva know that the people on the right-hand path or the left-hand path don't. It's not enough. So that's why even those on the right-hand path, as Master Samael points out, they have to always reincarnate because they are on the spiral path. And ironically, the Bodhisattva are here to teach the direct path. That the spirals are here, the upward spiral and the downward spiral are here to do what? To balance themselves out and bring us to the middle way, between the upward spiral and the downward spiral. And for that, you must see it from a different dimension. You see it from the axes on which the spirals expand and contract. The 0 point. That which is beyond the Tao. But that's an advanced teaching, and people need baby steps, and people need to be able to get there. And people need to be able to understand and comprehend how to work with the downward spiral, how to work with suffering and challenges, how to work with life that's baffling. And that basic fundamental dynamic that is really it's philosophical, it's cosmological, it's technological, it's sociological, it's psychological, it's it's meta phenomenological, because it's beyond all phenomenon. It's at the heart of it all. If we can get people to that point and visualizing and working with that simple, and anybody who's ever learned to play the piano or learned to do everything, they already know that process. Everybody knows this intuitively, inherently within themselves. Everybody that goes to the gym can get this. Everybody who's learned to play piano can understand this. Everybody who's learned to trade can understand this. Everybody who's learned to ride a bicycle can understand this. Not just understand this, but know this. They know it because they've done it. They've lived it. They have the self-evident experiential knowledge of it, but in an analogous form. All we have to do is connect with them on some vertical, on like, we could imagine like many spokes of a wheel, and where and those spokes are holding a rim, and on that rim is a tire, and that tire is where the rubber meets the road. But all those spokes lead back to the same hub. This is the hub. This is the hub. There. This is the hub. Excuse me. Goodness. Okay. Cassandra says, the downward spiral was part of the whole in the path of the upward trek or spiral to the soul's arrival and rest at the center. She says a marble will do this naturally. So yeah, it's like the in-breath and the out-breath, right? We have to, or the analogy that we really like is the dungeon analogy, the labyrinth analogy. We have to go down into hell. We have to go down into the dungeon and defeat the boss in order to get to the next level. Anybody who's ever played a video game knows this, right? And you have to face that. You can't just level up. You can't just level up like the New Agers think, just by positive thinking. No, that's not how it works. You're leaving out half of the Tao. You're leaving out half of the equation. That's like a mountain climber learning to be a mountain climber by tobogganing. It's not how it works. Any other questions or comments, or any other any inquiries about the essential practices of mindfulness and meditation and sexual alchemy, and where they fit onto the AUM of Life, or anything else at all? Any comments, any questions? We actually got through it faster than I thought we would. It's actually a very long, well, you guys went through it, right? You sat through it. It's still a very long presentation, right? like 70 slides. I don't know if you were counting, but it's a very long presentation. That's why, this whole Atlas project phenomenon has to be broken up and explained in these little bite-sized portions. Not that today was a bite-sized portion, far from it, but everything needs to be kind of distilled down to a very simple expression. As Azil says, he sure as hell didn't count. And Benjamin says, is liberation similar to obtaining wisdom or understanding? Okay, so let me explain this specifically. The obtaining of wisdom comes throughout the process. Because wisdom comes through experience. So through the very process of being mindful and diagnosing your defects and vices and analyzing how they cause you and others suffering, okay, you should already be gaining wisdom there about what not to do. The real understanding or comprehension comes through this step, which is called synthesis. That's that moment, that eureka moment, that comes in meditation or contemplation, that flash of lightning, that eureka, and you now know how that ego causes suffering. Now you know how powerful it is, and you know what it can do, and you know how it has its stranglehold over you, right? That's the knowledge. Liberation is the consciousness which is liberated from that ego after your divine mother eliminates it. So you can gain knowledge, you can synthesize knowledge, you can gain information through meditation on your egos. That's not what's liberated. What's liberated is the consciousness that was bottled up and trapped inside those egos. Now, with that consciousness, you have more ammunition, you have more to work with. Because consciousness is the medium of knowing. So you have more to work with. It's like you increase your bandwidth, you increase your hard drive capacity, you increase your CPU capacity, if you want to use some technological analogies. Because all that capacity was being taken up by this malware that was stealing your system resources, right? And consciousness is one of those precious system resources. It's like it's bandwidth, it's hard drive space, and it's processing power. So just imagine you had on your computer a malware, a spyware that had taken a whole chunk of computing power, of CPU power, of bandwidth, and of hard drive space. Now, when you run your anti-malware, right? Your anti-malware software, you do your scanning, you do your diagnosis, you do your analysis, and then you figure out what malware you have, what spyware you have, and then the system, your anti-malware, is able to eliminate that malware from your computer. Then all those system resources are liberated, they're freed up. Benjamin says, thank you for the explanation. That fits perfectly with the analogy of Dungeons and Dragons where the princess is rescued. It is the consciousness that is being liberated from the grasp of the egos. Yes, exactly. Because psyche is feminine. That's why it's always a sleeping beauty or Snow White who's put to sleep by the apple, right? And she has to be awoken by the huntsman because the hero has to liberate psyche from her spell, the spell that she is under. And psyche is feminine. That's why it's not a patriarchy thing. That's a modern feminist ignorant interpretation of what were always esoteric, metaphysical, scientific documents written in symbol and allegory. We're going to back up here all the way to Julie, who said, what about if your partner doesn't try and thinks he sees? How is it best to react? Oh, okay. That's a big, big topic, but we're not trying to shy away from it. It's just this is a topic which deserves its own live stream, let's be honest. And the reality is if you truly see and know something he doesn't, and he refuses to see it or acknowledge it and so on, and no, let me phrase that a different way. If you're truly meant to be with him, then what he's doing and the way he's doing it in a very real way is mirroring something within you and is triggering something within you for a reason. Now that's a bitter pill to swallow. That's hard to hear. But that's if you are truly meant to be together, you are meant to learn from each other, and you are energetically matched, which means you're matching egos as well. You have synergies on all levels, including synergies in the subconscious mind. And if there's something that he's saying or doing or not doing and not saying that's triggering you, then that's what you need to look at. And if you have a tendency to want to try to control circumstances and outcomes, and he's not going along with that, you have to ask yourself, what is it within you that wants to control circumstances, outcomes, and people? Again, we're not trying to turn it around and paint it all on you and saying, no, you're the one to blame. No, we're not. That's not what we're doing here. It's just that you're a mirror to him and he's a mirror to you. But knowing that and working with that is like working with the AUM of Life. It's like recognizing that, yeah, relationships are baffling. Relationships are baffling, and we have to bump up against those baffles and swirl around like, what the hell is going on, in order to become closer together and more aligned with each other. As in because if we're both can work with that process of the AUM of Life, and we can work at that relationships are baffling, and they're baffling for a reason. Why? To create structured living water, to create structured living beings, more alignment. And remember, use that Japanese blacksmith analogy of the carbon and the steel, right? And so carbon and steel are two things that don't belong together. That they don't easily. I mean, it's steel, okay? And carbon it's coal, it's ash. But your divine mother is the fire in the fiery crucible, in the forge of Vulcan. And if it's not sparks in the bedroom, it's a raging grease fire in the kitchen. Every couple knows this. Every couple knows this, and every couple who has ever had so-called makeup sex knows this. that sexual chemistry between a couple, the sexual energy wants to flow. It wants to connect and it wants to ignite. And if the energy isn't flowing up and at him, it wants to flow down and out. And one of the ways that the egos get the sexual energy to flow down and out is in the kitchen. And you know what I mean by that, right? The raging grease fire in the kitchen, right? It's all the arguments. And so and every couple knows this. And we have an article that that goes through this in detail. And let us pull it up here for you and then share, then we give you the link. Here we go. Okay, this is the article. It's called Lovers and Cheaters, and note the careful spelling of that. Lovers and Chi-eaters. The hidden truth about sex and relationships. And the link is in the chat, and momentarily it'll be on screen as well. Okay, so this article deals specifically with a lot of these issues and dynamics. But you're not the first person to experience this who's on the spiritual path, and it's just funny because it's serendipitous, because just recently we were speaking with someone who has been working for years, well, for a long time, let's put it that way, on, quote, fixing the person that she is with, and that he has made progress, but she's now sort of coming to terms. The universe sent her a sign, and I'm not going to get into details, but the universe sent her a sign, and that perhaps he's just really not ready to go where she needs him to be. And so she's now at that point where she's meditating and really trying to find an answer. Is she with the right person? Has she outgrown this person? Are they growing apart now? He might have been the person that she needed to be with for that time. That's a definition of a soulmate. Two people who come together for a period of time to work together, to be together, but then they start going their separate ways. But that's not a twin soul. Twin soul is the person that we're supposed to be together, and once you're together, you stay together, because there's nobody else out there that you can learn more from or develop further with, right? A soulmate can be temporary, because there could be another soulmate waiting for you out there, or your twin soul waiting for you, the person who you can really help, and the person who can really help you. So, but that's another issue. It's just that, you're bringing that up, and or perhaps we're reading more into the situation than we should be. It's just serendipitous that another individual has been approached us, and has been we've been her ear, so to speak, and she's been, we're really the only person in her life that she can talk to about this stuff on this level. So, but anyway, there's that article for you. The link is in the chat, and the link was on the screen. We're going to move on. We hope that helped. Okay, let's go back to our CSAM. Mugaboo says, this is the mistake most of us make. For example, when we see a hunter-gatherer tribe naked in the Amazon, we think these people have always lived like this. This is far from the truth. No, that's absolutely correct. Most of these tribes descend from ancient high civilizations. It is far easier to go on a downward spiral than it is to rise. It doesn't take much effort to live like an animal. You know, this is, we couldn't have said it better ourselves. And of course, this is unfortunately something which, um, in modern times, the uh, the contemporary woke, postmodern, politically correct view is to, uh, what's the word? Idolize, revere. Yes, I suppose on some level we have to honor and respect everybody. We don't have to look down on anybody. We don't have to disrespect anyone. And we certainly don't have to, we certainly mustn't, um, persecute anyone. And we mustn't force onto people, in the ways that colonialism did so much of what they were trying to force upon them. However, when one steps back and looks objectively at the data and looks objectively at the history, and one is able to detach oneself from the subjective political correctness, from the subjective wokeness and the revisionist history, one discovers that colonialism did more to free Africa from the terrible state that it was in and that it remains in to a large degree, because slavery still exists in Africa. The white people did not bring slavery to Africa. The explorers who went to Africa and the colonial powers that went to Africa, they participated wrongly, but participated in a industry which was already very well established on the continent of Africa. That's Black Africans enslaving other Black Africans. And in fact, slavery was an institution that goes all the way back in human history, back before the time of the Romans. Slavery was just something that that all cultures and civilizations that descended into barbarism ended up committing, and Africa was no different. The fact that the European colonial powers partook in it, on the one hand, it was barbaric and they shouldn't have done it, but on the other hand, the African slaves and their descendants who ended up in North America, the descendants of those slaves are much, much, much better off today than the descendants of the Black African slaves who remained in Africa. No one talks about that. That's not politically correct, but that's the truth. That's the objective truth. And again, slavery persists today in Africa. We can argue till the cows come home about, you know, different forms of slavery and so on and so forth, but we're not here to get into the nuances of that particular debate. But that's why we included these slides in our presentation, and why it's so important to understand Oh, man. This fact, these nations, right? These nations, they fell and produced these maps. And today, we are expected to revere and honor and idolize all of these different tribes and their spirituality and everything else when they're all remnants and they're all on a downward spiral, a devolving spiral. But the hold that that type of spirituality has on people, just look at the influence that they have, and look at the influence of Black culture on whites. Look at the fact that music now in the West is nothing but the beat. Boom, 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 boom. And there's no longer any real dancing. Now it's jumping up and down to the beat of a drum. Where do you go in the world to see people jumping up and down to the beat of a drum? Where is that the dominant culture? That's in those, all the Aboriginal tribal peoples of the world. That's their culture. Jumping or writhing or dancing around to the beat of a drum. That's their culture, or an essential aspect of their culture, a central aspect of their culture. That and psychedelic use and so on and so forth. Well, where do you find that? Where did tobacco use come from? And where does psychedelic use come from? And and the shamanism and all this kind of type of stuff. It's all in those Aboriginal tribal things. And now the lure of that is so powerful that even Westerners and those who are degenerating, they're losing their religion, they're losing their spirituality, their Western spirituality, because they are disillusioned with the hypocrisy of Catholicism. And as Benjamin points out, the hypocrisy of the megachurches, the Christian megachurches. And they're turning away from the dogmatism, and they're turning away from all of that superficial, literal stuff, and waiting for them with arms wide open is the religion of nature idolatry, of Aboriginal spirituality, of shamanism, and all the rest of it. Dream quests, vision quests, and all the rest of it. And the jumping up and down to the beat of a drum, and the tattoos and the piercings and the scarring, it's all related, because tattoos and piercing and scarring is also a dominant feature of primal Aboriginal cultures all over the world. Julie asks a follow-up question. What if your partner thinks he is growing when it's like the Men in Black dudes wipes his mind? Again, we will say that we've covered this in our previous answer, and that we encourage you to read that article. We can't tell you, without more information, we can't give you any advice on that. But what we can do is direct you to the article and give you a larger framework, a larger perspective to contemplate and meditate on. Because, as we said, perhaps you were meant to be together for a while. Perhaps you've just outgrown him. It could be as simple as that. But perhaps not. Perhaps you haven't learned yet what you needed to learn. Benjamin says, okay, so yeah, we answered that. Okay, so Julie says, great analogy. What if they believe and insist they installed the virus where? What if they believe and insist they installed the malware in themselves? That's an interesting question. And I'm not sure. We might need more context around it, but this might be a case of somebody who doesn't know they need to be liberated, or someone doesn't know they need to be helped. So, for example, if you're trying to help them overcome their fear, and they say, "No, no, 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 I choose fear. I need my fear. Fear is what keeps me alive. Fear is what keeps me going." That type of thing. If we understand your question correctly, so they're identified and they're attached to their egos. They don't want to comprehend their egos. They don't believe that ego is causing them harm. On the contrary, I chose that malware. I installed that malware for a reason. I need that malware. That malware serves me. That's why I installed it. And yeah, so if you're dealing with someone like that, you cannot help someone who doesn't want to be helped. You cannot cure an alcoholic who doesn't know that they're an alcoholic, who refuses to accept that they're an alcoholic. You can't help an alcoholic like that. Right? We've said this before. And anybody who's ever tried to help an alcoholic or any other addict knows this. That person needs to be able to stand up, raise their hand, and admit to themselves and others, I'm so-and-so and I have a problem. Then and only then are they in a position to be helped. Cassandra says, I had a partner who perceived through corrupt filters. My work was to understand and yet value my path work. Anybody who perceives through any filters is corrupt. The filters themselves are, any filter is by definition corrupt, because it's corrupting the pure consciousness. But yeah, someone who has particularly subjective filters, and yeah, we have to work with what we have, and what we have is ourselves. That's what we work with primarily. And so many times, if we're with someone who's difficult, that's an opportunity for us to learn patience, and it's an opportunity for us to grow. And very often in that circumstance, if we do our work well, we outgrow them. We learned what we needed to learn from being around them. But then once we've learned that, we can move on. It doesn't, we're not obligated to stick with someone forever if they don't serve us anymore. And if we really can't help them, if they don't want our help, if they're not growing, if they're not developing, and we're not getting anything out of the relationship anymore, why are we together? Why stay together? What? For convenience? For sex? Next question. Well, it has really helped show me how the amnesia falls back in. He is awesome, but it's like amazes me. Okay. Then we had a couple quotes, and she says also, yes, I felt like this. It was and is frustrating, but I even said to him that maybe his soul has actually made a choice to help me grow and observe my emotions and training for the next step. We are great together, but I explained early and have been super gentle that I have made an oath now. I have to serve when the time comes. But thanks. Okay. Cassandra says, even Irish like river dancing, stepping movements. Yeah, so there's dancing, there's real dancing. And then there's what dancing devolves into, if it's allowed to do so. Mugaboo says, to say that colonialism liberated us is a half-truth. We lost our failing spirituality, lost our wisdom. We have better technology than 200 years ago, but we have become worse as a people. Okay. Potentially, possibly, yes, that's true. In certain aspects, in certain ways, yes, that's true. But in other ways, look to those parts of Africa which were never really touched by colonialism. Like, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, deep in the Congo and so on. Or look at places where the colonizers were eradicated. And for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, look at the warlords and some of what's going on between the tribes and the gangs and the conflicts and so on. For better or for worse, the presence of the colonies and the colonizers, the colonial powers, they brought new opportunity, a second chance to Africa. Now, does it mean that they built a high civilization? No, certainly not. But at least they didn't degenerate into the kind of brutal tribal warfare which is going on in certain parts of Africa, where the influence of colonialism didn't reach. So Africa was on a devolutionary arc already. And the vibrant enlightenment energy and vitality of the West did reach Africa. Now, unfortunately, we're not trying to paint things as a rosy, the answer to all your problems, because it's certainly not. Because look at the West, look at Europe, right? I mean, that's nothing to be proud of. How we live, and we might, we have a good standard of living. We might have done a great many things to alleviate poverty and alleviate many hardships and so on, but spiritually, but Africa is not spiritually better off either. But it wouldn't have been spiritually better off without colonialism. It would have been in just as bad, if not a worse place. For example, the entire continent would have been consumed by slavery on top of everything else. So it's a difficult thing, because it's obviously all speculation. But where it stops being speculation is, as we said, those parts of Africa which those African people are tearing themselves to pieces. They're tearing each other apart. And there's no white influence. There's no European whatever influence there, except for perhaps the fact that these people are engaged in gun trade and weapons and warfare. But they would be killing each other with whatever they had at their disposal. It just so happens that they have AK-47s at their disposal. So they're killing each other, they're slaughtering each other, and doing that brutal, savage tribal warfare with modern weapons. So you could argue that if the colonials never showed up, they wouldn't have modern weapons. But that has never stopped brutal tribal warfare from being brutal and savage. People who want to be brutal and savage will be brutal and savage. They don't need modern weapons to be brutal and savage. Human beings, not human beings, the human-like machines have been proving that and have proven that for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years, that modernity and colonialism and economic advantage and technology is not the cause of brute violence and savagery and hatred and atrocities, like the genocides happening in Rwanda and other places, in Somalia, and so on and so forth. Okay, all right. Mugaboo says, yeah, when we talk about slavery, this is a huge topic. In my country, Burundi, we had no slaves. We fought against the Arab slave traders. We had servants in my country, but they are free to leave anytime. Okay. All right. And he also says, to us, slavery never existed as an institution. So when Europeans say blacks in Africa have been enslaving each other forever, there is no nuance. Many people, kings died fighting slavery. No, fair enough. Fair enough. That's fair enough. The point is that foreigners did not bring slavery to Africa. Okay, this is the point. This is very much the point that we're making. Right? Is that Africa can't be painted with one brush, absolutely, but neither can its history and its situation just be blamed on colonialism and painting all the Europeans and all the foreigners with one brush, because it is much more nuanced than that. And there are, just like in North America, like it drives us crazy when people talk about the First Nations of North America, like there was all big one happy family when the Europeans arrived. No, this was not true. Because when the Europeans arrived as Dutch and as British and as French, and they brought their conflicts from Europe with them to North America. And right away, they had no problem finding allies among the First Nations people who wanted to get guns and weapons to exterminate their domestic enemies, and their domestic enemies allied with the British's enemies, the French. And so the picture is of course much more complex, and it can't be whitewashed and oversimplified. That's true. But on the other hand, the evidence is there now, and the fact is there, regardless of race, regardless of time, regardless of history, regardless of place, regardless of culture or anything else. There is no behavior of Africans against other Africans, tribes, nations against nations, tribes against tribes, or whatever that exists in Africa today that is solely can be blamed on colonialism. Right? Even if you take into account the Muslims and the introduction of Islam to Africa, and you might be able to argue but Islam is not in sub-Saharan Africa, and those aren't religious. Those aren't that tribal warfare that's taking on place, and the various different genocides which took place in Rwanda and Somalia against different. Those were different tribes, different types of Africans wanting to slaughter other kinds of Africans. It wasn't a religious war. It wasn't an economic war. It was purely tribal genocide. And that can't be blamed on colonialism. And you can't say that if the colonials never arrived in Africa, that would never have happened, that Rwanda and Somalia and these types of genocides would never have happened. No one can say that. Not with any objective authority. Cassandra says, Greed is in all humans and leads to humans lording over other humans. Yeah, it's greed, but it's really fear. Um, the desire to control others is fear, because that's the desire to control outcomes. And the best defense is a good offense. Dominance, the desire to dominate, is based in fear. Magabu says, this is a difficult topic. I lived in 4 African countries and I live in the West. History told by the computer is rarely 100% accurate. Yes, that's exactly why the history that we're telling you, you can't read anywhere. You won't find it anywhere. You're not allowed to explain this nowadays because the truth has been outlawed. The hard truth is politically incorrect. If I stood up in a university class today, in a university lecture, and said what I said here on this live stream about Africa, I would not only lose my job, I would lose my status as a professor, and I would not be able to teach in any Western institution for the rest of my life. No one would ever publish any books. I would be what they called canceled for speaking the truth. And it is a difficult topic. Of course, it's a difficult topic. It's always difficult to speak openly and truthfully about the human condition. And what is the human condition? This is the human condition. Nobody wants to hear this. Nobody wants the truth. And no man is more hated than he who speaks the truth. Plato said that. Plato said that thousands of years ago. If Plato said that thousands of years ago, before there was an internet, before there was Twitter, before there was a printing press, people didn't want. And why did Plato say that? Who did Plato say that about? Socrates, the one that the Athenians dragged off and killed, because the Athenians did not want to hear the hard truth that Socrates was telling them. If that was thousands of years ago. So just imagine how worse it is today. How much deeper in the downward spiral of devolution humanity has come. How much less the intellectual animals, the human-like machines are willing to hear the truth. Cassandra says, the work is to meet our own internal fear with compassion and also continuous work for mastery over fear. You face yourself, you meet your own fear, and you have compassion towards yourself, certainly. And to face your fear is to face the many, many faces of fear. And we have an article that discusses that in great detail, because if there's something that we know intimately, it's the demon of fear. And there's the article. It's also in the comments in the chat. And there it is on screen. And that's it there. Benjamin says, maybe the ego or the Black Lodge has been at work since the fall of mankind, from the killing of Abel, Adam and Eve's son. Actually, the Black Lodge was there in the Garden of Eden. That's a serpent. The tempting serpent. That's the temptation to abuse the sexual force. That's lust, that's desire. That's the apple that Eve takes. And the serpent whispering, oh no, go ahead, eat of the apple, you'll be like the gods, knowing good and evil. Serpent didn't lie. The Black Lodge caused the fall, caused the fall of humanity in the Lemurian times. The Black Lodge is always there. It has to be there. It has to be there in some capacity, because else there is no challenge. Can you play a game of chess without an opponent? What's the point? Can you become a better chess player without playing chess? And if the answer is no, can you play chess without an opponent? The Black Lodge was always there. All right. We're coming up on the 3.5 hour mark. So this is where I ask you one last time, if you have any questions or comments related to today or related to anything. This is your last chance today. Oh, important announcement. Important announcement. Today's the 12th. So next week is the 19th. Not the 19th, but on the 26th, there will be no live stream on March 26th. So I'll make the usual announcement that the live stream has been canceled 24 hours before that date. So anyway, I'll remind you again next week that on the 26th, there is no live stream. The reason is that the 26th is going to be the 4th year anniversary of my mother's death. And my father is having a mass said in her honor. And I will have to attend that mass, and that's going to be at 3:00 in the afternoon. So it's best. It's not about, I don't want to try to postpone or reschedule or whatever around that time, because there's a good chance that some friends of the family and so on will want to come, and maybe we'll have some kind of a before or after type of get together to reminisce, and just have a little mini celebration of life for my mother, that type of thing. So that's something that I cannot bow out of. So the 26th, then there will be no live stream. But next week we should be fine. We should be on no problem. So oh, you're very welcome, and thank you for those thoughts. It was 4 years ago that my mother passed away. So, but thank you for your thoughts. We actually have an article on our Divine Mother that we wrote on the 1-year anniversary of her passing, because my biological mother played a very, very important role, obviously, on my path and showing me. And so her cancer and her passing played a big part in anyway, if you're interested in, you can read more about that in our article on the Divine Mother. And you're welcome. We hope it was insightful. Then that's good. That's good. Okay. Any other questions or comments from anybody? Anyone at all? Because if not, then we will thank you all once again for being with us. You're always welcome. And we hope to see you next week. And until then, be safe and be calm, be relaxed, and, work diligently. And as always, inferential peace. Oh, some more comments. The other article link. Hang on, let's pull it up. All these articles, when you get to the blog, you can just click home and you can see all the articles you see scrolling here. They're all there. They have all the titles. This is the one here, O Divine Mother, Here Art Thou. So there's the link. But you know what? It's so much easier to just remember atlas.info because all the articles are there. You can find all of them. They're very clearly titled. So, all right. Benjamin says, thank you for today's live stream, sir. Really appreciate sharing your insights. You're welcome, Benjamin. Our other Benjamin says, my condolences and thank you for today. You're welcome. And Mugaboo says, have peace and also have a great week. Thank you, Mugaboo, and to you. And Cassandra says, thank you. Okay. So once again, thank you all for being here. And again, we hope to see you again soon. Thank you. And inferential peace. Take care.